Greetings from Tidelands Church. I am sure that many of you recognize this place, even though it's probably been a long time since you've been down here, and I thought this would be a great time to just let you know, hey look, it's okay, things are all right, and I've been spending a little bit more time down here working on some of the things preparing for when we are able to get back together. But I wanted to tell you a story. This might be a little bit longer than normal, so normal being my normal sort of videos I share online. So if you get bored, you can fast forward. But I think it's a good story, so I want to share it with you because I'd read something recently where a church in Seattle mentioned that this COVID-19 thing they were experiencing wasn't the first time that they had experienced going through a pandemic. And they mentioned the 1919 flu pandemic. And that got me thinking. And we've said so many times, the church is not a building. That the church is the people. It's you, it's me, it's those listening to this right now. And we believe that wholeheartedly. In fact, so much so that we didn't even look for a building when we started Tidelands. This literally was something that God just sort of put out to us, and that's a story I've shared before. I'm not going to share it all right now, but I'll just say that this building was the first Presbyterian Church of Stanwood. It had the congregation for that church. The church was the people, but this building was what they built as their place of worship. And that church, they built this around 1909. They started worshiping back in 1904, and they had meetings here in Stanwood and on Commando Island. That church we know disappeared in the early 1920s. But we didn't know why or how. When we bought this building, we started digging into it. We got some of the old pictures, and we even got the original records from the Presbyterian Historical Society of their book. They've digitized it. That book still exists because when this church closed, that book went to what was then Bellingham Presbytery and then went eventually all the way back to a climate-controlled archive back, I can't remember, I think it's well, I don't want to guess because I can't remember where it's from. Probably Louisville. But anyway, they sent me the digitized archives. So when I heard that story about the church in Seattle that said their congregation had lived through a pandemic once already, it got me thinking. I thought, did I read anything about that in those minutes? They're not very detailed minutes. I'll just say that. They're pretty brief, but they're handwritten, so they're kind of hard to read. But I went back and started looking through the 1919 entries, and sure enough, there it is in the records. It says that they had to shut the church down for 4 months due to the ongoing influenza pandemic. I have that clipped, a little digital clip of that, and I'll try to send that to you in one of these posts online so that those of you who are curious can see it. But I thought that was really interesting. And then, because we have never been able to solve the mystery of why this congregation closed, and knowing what we all know now, about the challenges of this time and how that affects the economy and jobs and people and families and churches and their financing and all those things, I thought, I wonder if that had anything to do with it. So I continued reading through the minutes. And sure enough, the entries after that, their session meetings, they clearly were struggling with finances. They were clearly struggling with membership. They were having some problems that they apparently weren't able to overcome after that shutdown at the end of 1919. So that by the time you get into 1920 in the minutes book, they actually closed the church for all of August without a reference as to why. And then only a few entries after that in 1920 and then 1921, it's the last entry. And as far as we know, it was soon after that the church closed down. And that would be a terribly tragic story, but of course with God that's never the end of the story. Because the people who did such a beautiful job remodeling this building, we bought this from them, and they told us they always called it the church building, and when they remodeled it and they took the drywall off, well, I don't think it was drywall, but what they took off, they saw underneath in the structure were written prayers and Bible verses from the people who built this church, from that original congregation. And so when we moved in here, we said that this was a sign of God's faithfulness. God clearly, orchestrated it so that we could be back in here. And yes, God's church is so much bigger than Presbyterians, and we know that. And there's a vibrant community of Christians here before Tidelands started. And yet there were these pioneering Christians who were praying, I'm sure, and heartbroken that when this place closed, and praying that God would continue some kind of a worshiping community here. So we believe we were an answer to that prayer, but now I'm beginning to think even bigger. What if this is the second act, if you will? This is where we now get to be the ones who live through a pandemic and not just survive, but actually thrive as a congregation through it. Yes, it's a pain sometimes to have to do all the Zoom stuff and use technology all the time and see myself on video, and I complain about it as much as anybody, but we have things now that they didn't have, and God's using those so that we continue in worship and we continue connecting with each other. And so I'm sort of excited about the possibility now that I'm thinking about that this might be our time to be a further answer to prayer to some of those faithful Christians who built this place where we get to worship. How cool is that? I just wanted to share that with you today. Hope you're all doing well, and we will see each other soon.